This appeal is directed against the judgment and order of the Delhi High Court by which it allowed the appeals of the two respondents, set aside the judgment and decree passed by the trial court, and permitted the appellants to file their written statements within 4 weeks from the date of the judgment, directing further that the trial court would then proceed with the suit and dispose it in accordance with law. The appellant instituted a suit under Order 37 of the Code of Civil Procedure 1908 for realization of its dues against defendant number 1 and the two respondents who were the guarantors to the loan according to the case of the appellant plaintiff and defendant number 1, who was the owner of a plot of land, approached the appellant plaintiff for a loan for constructing a house on the plot. The loan was sanctioned. Defendant number 1 executed the loan agreement and a promissory note in favor of the appellant. In addition, defendant number 1 also created an equitable mortgage in favor of the plaintiff by depositing the title deeds of the plot in question. The other two defendants, respondents before this court stood guarantee for repayment of the loan and executed the letters of guarantee. On the execution of the necessary documents, the loan was disbursed to defendant number 1 in 2 installments. The loan amount along with interest at the rate of 15% per annum was to be repaid in equalized monthly installments over a period of 180 months, and in case of default, according to the terms of the loan, the outstanding would attract additional interest at the rate 18% per annum. The defendants defaulted in payment of the EMIs, and as a result, a large sum was outstanding against them. The defendants did not pay the installments despite letters and reminders. Hence, the plaintiff invoked the guarantees and intimated the two respondents that in case of failure to make the payment, legal proceedings would be instituted against them. Despite the aforesaid letter and legal notices sent on behalf of the appellant, the defendants did not pay the outstanding amount of rupees 4 lakh, and the plaintiff was thus left with no option but to institute the suit for realization of its dues from defendant number 1 and the guarantors of the said loan as such. Defendant number 1 did not appear in the suit despite notice. The two defendants respondents however appeared before the trial court and filed separate applications under order 37 rule 3 of the Code of Civil Procedure for permission to defend the suit. The defendants' applications were based on a number of grounds, but we may only advert to the one that seems to have way with the High Court. It was contended on behalf of the respondents that since the plaintiff appellant had got a promissory note executed in its favor by the borrower, defendant number 1, and had further made the borrower create an equitable mortgage in its favor by deposit of title deeds, they would be absolved of their liability in terms of Section 139 of the Contract Act. According to the respondents, their plea gave rise to a triable issue, and they accordingly sought permission to file their return statements and contest the suit. The trial court, by its judgment and order, examined all the pleas, including the one based in section 139 of the Contract Act, and found and held that none of the pleas raised by the defendants gave rise to any substantial defense against the claim of the plaintiff. Accordingly, it dismissed the petitions filed by the defendants respondents by order dated and proceeded to decree the suit of the appellant plaintiff for a sum of rupees 4 lakh, along with cost and expense and future interest at the rate of 10% per annum on the decreal amount from the date of filing of the suit till the date of realization. In appeal, the Delhi High Court, as noted above, set aside the order and decree passed by the trial court and directed it to allow the defendants respondents to file their return statement and proceed to try the suit. From that stage, the High Court noted that, relying upon Section 139 of the Contract Act, a contention was raised by the respondents that for recovery of its loan from defendant number 1, the principal borrower, the plaintiff, should have taken recourse first by either seeking to give effect to the promissory note or by enforcing the equitable mortgage. Neither of these remedies which were upon to the plaintiff were taken recourse to, and the recovery was sought to be made straightway from the appellants. The High Court further held that the trial judge fell into error in holding that Section 139 of the Contract Act had no application to the facts of the case. According to the High Court, this was beyond the scope of deciding an application for leave. It is clear from the discussion made herein above that the said case was not one relating to compounding of offense. Apart from that, the court found that the dues of the banks have been satisfied by receiving the money, and the suits filed by the bank in the civil court have been compromised. The FIRs were filed in 1987 to 1988, and the investigation had not been completed till 1991. On those facts, the court, rendering the judgment in July 1996, felt that having regard to the lapse of time and also having regard to the fact that there is a compromise decree satisfying the bank's dues, there is no purpose in allowing the criminal prosecution to proceed. On this consideration, this court held the proceeding of Section 482 of Criminal Procedure Code. In the facts of that case, the learned judges held that the bank filed suits for recovery of the dues on account of grant of credit facility, and the suits have been compromised on receiving the payments from the company concerned. The learned court held it an offense of cheating is prima facie constituted. Such offense is a compoundable offense, and compromise decrees passed in the suits instituted by the banks for all intents and purposes amount to compounding of the offense of cheating. In that case, the court came to the conclusion, since the claims of the banks have been satisfied and the suits instituted by the banks have been compromised on receiving payments, the court felt that the complainant should not be perused any further, and therefore the decision of the High Court in quashing the complaint does not require any interference under Article 136 of the Constitution. It is therefore clear that no legal proposition has been laid down on the compounding of offense. This court proceeded on the peculiar facts of the case discussed above. Therefore, the said decision cannot be an authority to contend that by mere sanctioning of a scheme, the offences committed by the appellant company prior to the scheme stand automatically compounded. Reliance was also placed on the decision of this court in the case of CBI New Delhi, reported in that case. Reliance was placed on the decision of this court. The court found that the aforesaid scheme, being a voluntary scheme introduced by the court before the trial court and filed separate applications under Order 37, Rule 3 of the Code of Civil Procedure for permission to defend the suit. The defendants' applications were based on a number of grounds, but we may only advert to the one that seems to have weighed with the High Court. It was contended on behalf of the respondents that since the plaintiff appellant had got a promissory note executed in its favor by the borrower, defendant number 1, and had further made the borrower create an equitable mortgage in its favor by deposit of title deeds, they would be absolved of their liability in terms of Section 139 of the Contract Act. According to the respondents, their plea gave rise to a tribal issue and they accordingly sought permission to file their written statements and contest the suit. The trial court, by its judgment and order, examined all the pleas, including the one based on Section 139 of the Contract Act, and found and held that none of the pleas raised by the defendants gave rise to any substantial defense against the claim of the plaintiff. Accordingly, it dismissed the petitions filed by the defendants, respondents, by order dated, and proceeded to decree the suit of the appellant plaintiff for a sum of rupees 4 lakh along with cost and expense and future interest at the rate of 10% per annum on the decreal amount from the date of filing of the suit till the date of realization. In appeal, the Delhi High Court, as noted above, set aside the order and decree passed by the trial court and directed to allow the defendants, respondents to file their written statement and proceed to try the suit. From that stage, the High Court noted that relying upon Section 139 of the Contract Act, a contention was raised by the respondents that for recovery of its loan from defendant number 1, the principal borrower, the plaintiff should have taken recourse first by either seeking to give effect to the promissory note or by enforcing the equitable mortgage. Thereafter, a similar request was made to the Speaker by Shri Dharam Singh, another member of the Vidhan Sabha, elected as a candidate of the HJC to recognize the merger of the HJC with the INC and to also recognize him along with the other 4 legislators as members of the INC in the Haryana Vidhan Sabha. Subsequently, another application was filed by Shri Dharam Singh before the Speaker on 10th November 2009, requesting him to be recognized as a part of the INC in the Haryana Vidhan Sabha. Thereafter, the Speaker fixed for examination, cross-examination of MLA and his witnesses, and on the said date, Shri Bishnoi's evidence was tendered and recorded. The learned Solicitor General then challenged the orders of the Division Bench of the High Court on the ground of violation of the principles of natural justice. It was contended that while the High Court had concluded the hearing and reserved judgment on 20th July 2011 by order dated 12th October 2011, it directed the Speaker to place on record the status of the proceedings relating to the disqualification petitions. Although the same were duly filed without giving the parties further opportunity of hearing with regard to the said records, the Division Bench directed the matter to be listed for further consideration on 19th December 2011. It was submitted that though the bench did not assemble on 19th December 2011, the division bench delivered the impugned judgment on 20th December 2011 without any further opportunity of hearing to the parties. The learned Solicitor General submitted that the procedure adopted was contrary to the law laid down in another case wherein it was stated as under, in view of the limited scope of judicial review that is available on account of the finality clause in paragraph 6 and also having regard to the constitutional intendment and the status of the repository of the adjudicatory power, that's Speaker, Chairman, judicial review cannot be available at a stage prior to the making of a decision by the Speaker, Chairman, and a quick time action would not be permissible, nor would interference be permissible at an in-between stage of the proceedings. Exception will, however, have to be made in respect of cases where disqualification or suspension is imposed during the pendency of the proceedings, and such disqualification or suspension is likely to have grave, immediate, and irreversible repercussions and consequence. The learned Solicitor General sought to re-emphasize the fact that the present case is not a case involving disqualification or suspension of a member of the House by the Speaker during the pendency of the proceedings, but relates to disqualification proceedings pending before the Speaker, which were not being disposed of for one reason or the other. It was submitted that the fact that the Speaker had not finalized the disqualification petitions for almost a period of 2 years could not and did not vest the High Court with power to the jurisdiction of the Speaker to pass interim orders. The learned Solicitor General lastly urged that the single most important error in the impugned judgment is that it sought to foreclose the right of the Speaker to decide the disqualification petitions under paragraph 4 of the 10th schedule. The said decision was also wrong, since the division bench chose to follow judgments which related to the concept of split under paragraph 3 of the 10th schedule, which today stands deleted therefrom. The learned Solicitor General submitted that there was a clear difference between matters relating to the erstwhile paragraph 3 of the 10th schedule and paragraph 4 thereof, while paragraph 3 of the 10th schedule required proof of two splits. Paragraph 4 requires proof of only one deemed merger. The learned Solicitor General submitted that there was no concept of deemed split in paragraph 3. It was submitted that paragraph 4 is meant only as a defense to a petition for disqualification, and the same would succeed or fail depending on whether there was a deemed merger or not. Further application was filed by one Mr. A.K. Arora, who is also an MLA of the Haryana Vidhan Sabha. Clause 2 defines the expression very prestigious unit as a new industrial unit established in any Panchayat Samiti of the state during the period of this scheme, in which investment in fixed capital is rupees 100 crores or more. However, the progressive investment of the amount of project cost as appraised by the financial institutions shall be considered as investment made by a new unit as soon as such investment reaches or crosses the point of rupees 100 crores during the operative period of the scheme. The unit shall acquire the status of a very prestigious unit for the purpose of claiming enhanced proportionate benefits under this scheme. The challenge by the appellant is threefold. Firstly, it is contended that prior to the respondent bank acquiring the said property in an auction sale, the same had been re-entered by the Land and Development Office of the Government of India, being the lessor of the land underneath the property, and thus no title was acquired by the respondent bank, and the said property was not public premises within the meaning of section 2E of the PP Act. For the state officer of the respondent bank to pass an order with respect thereto. Secondly, it is contended that no bona fide requirement on which ground the appellant was sought to be evicted had been established, and rather it stood admitted that the eviction of the appellant was with profit motive. Lastly, it is contended that no proper opportunity to lead evidence was given to the appellant by the state officer of the respondent bank as far as the first of the challenge aforesaid is concerned. The admitted position is that when the respondent bank, after bidding for the said property in an auction, had applied to the court for confirmation of the sale in its favor, the L&DO had objected on the ground that the property having been re-entered, no title could be conveyed to the respondent bank. Matter pertains to the appointment to the post of Deputy Director Law in the other backward class category. Appointments to the vacancies in the aforesaid post were to be made in the Office of Competition Commission of India. The three appellants in these three appeals were also the candidates who appeared in the written test. After qualifying the written test, they also faced the interview. However, their names did not appear in the list of candidates finally selected. According to the appellants, their non-selection was the result of altering the prescribed mode of selection midway, that's after the initiation of recruitment process, which was impermissible. This contention has not found favor with either the learned single judge in the writ petitions filed by them or the division bench of the High Court in the appeals filed by them, challenging the order of the learned single judge. Bone of contention before us also remains the same. Therefore, the issue which needs to be decided is as to whether there was any change in the mode of selection after the process of selection had started. CCI had issued the notification through public notice inviting applications for various posts. We are concerned with the post of Deputy Director Law, for which 13 vacancies were. Clause 7 of the notification stipulated the mode of selection in the following manner. All the applications received by the due date will be screened with the reference to the minimum qualification criteria. From amongst the eligible candidates, suitable candidates will be short-listed through a transparent mechanism, and the short-listed candidates will be called for interview before final selection. Mere fulfilling of minimum qualifications by itself would not entitle any applicant for being called for interview. The eligibility, qualification, experience required for this post was also provided in the advertisement. It is undisputed that the appellants fulfilled the eligibility condition, being holder of degree of Bachelor of Law professional as well as 3 years experience in the relevant field, including in the corporate sector. Written test for this post was held on for shortlisting of candidates for interview. Admit card was also issued to the appellants for appearing in the written test along with the detailed instructions, including the scheme of examination, paragraphs 4 and 9 of the instruction, which were given to the examinees. Candidates are relevant for our purposes and therefore we reproduce the same herein under. The selection to all the positions advertised will be based on a written test followed by an interview of candidates. Written test will carry 70% of the marks and interview will have 20% of the marks. The written test will be in 2 parts. The first part will be based on multiple choice questions for 50 marks. There is no negative marking in this multiple choice questions. The second part, carrying 30 marks, will be distributed to the descriptive questions on the subject of your specialization within the broad outline of the subject of specialization as indicated in the advertisement. Candidates who do not secure 50% of the marks in the test will not be called for the interview. However, for candidates belonging to the reserved categories, the cutoff marks will be 40% of the total marks. Written examination was of 80 marks and the appellants secured more than 50% marks therein. They were called for the interview, which was held on 19th March 2010 and the result of which was published on the website of the CCI. Finally, only 5 candidates, that too from the general category, were selected. Nobody from the OBC category, to which category the appellants belonged, emerged successful on obtaining the information from the respondents Under the Right to Information Act 2005, the appellant came to know that he had secured only 2 marks out of 20 marks in the interview. In this manner, total marks secured by him were 53 out of 100 marks. He also learned that the respondents had fixed the benchmark of 70 marks for the general category and 65 marks for the reserved category candidates. Since the total marks obtained by all these appellants were less than 65, that was the reason for their non-selection. It is this fixation of benchmark which was agitated the appellants, and according to them it amounts to changing the selection procedure midway, which is illegal. The appellants approached the High Court of Delhi by filing a writ petitions challenging their non-selection, primarily on the ground that the selection criteria was changed arbitrarily, that too after the advertisement, and the law did not permit the respondents to change the rules of the game after the game had started. The precise contention in this behalf was that the benchmark which was fixed at 70 and 65 marks or above in the general and reserved category respectively for the purpose of selection was not mentioned earlier. That's before the start of selection process, either in the advertisement or otherwise. The writ petitions were contested by the respondents. In the counter affidavit filed by the CCI, it was explained that there was an overwhelming response received from the candidates for selection to the aforesaid post, and having regard to the large number of applications received, the CCI decided to undertake the selection to all posts notified in the advertisement on the basis of written state followed by interview, and accordingly it was determined that written test would be for 80 marks while 20 marks were attributed to interview. The present appeal depicts a factual score where this court is constrained to say that delay in disposal of the application by the Debts Recovery Tribunal at the appeal of Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal have the effect potentiality of creating in the economic spine of the country it a factual expose which is not only perplexing but assure in a sense of puzzlement, which in the ultimate eventuate compels one to ask how long can the financial institutions would suffer such attitude, how far the public interest be put to hazard because of small and sometimes individual interest, to what extent the defaulters be given protection in the name of balancing the stringent powers vested on the banks and the statutory safeguards prescribed in favor of loanees. Even assuming there are legal lapses and abuses, how long the statutory tribunals take to put the controversy to rest, being oblivious of the fact that the concept of flexibility is inseparably associated with valuation of any asset. The present appeal by special leave is directed against the judgment and order dated passed by the High Court of Delhi in writ petition. The facts which are essential to be stated are that the appellant bank sanctioned home loan of rupees 12 lakhs to the respondent number 1 payable in equal monthly installments, and in lieu of that the borrower mortgaged the property which was purchased from the developer. The respondent number 2 herein, since the respondent number 1 failed to pay the installments, the loan amount was declared as non-performing asset in terms of the NPA guidelines issued by the Reserve Bank of India. The appellant bank issued a notice under section 13(2) of the Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Assets and Enforcement of Security Interest Act 2002 to the respondent number 1, directing him to pay the amount due, since the respondent number 1 did not make any payment. The Tahsildar Gurgaon took possession of the mortgaged property as per the order of the district magistrate and handed over the same to the appellant bank. The appellant bank, in order to sell the said property, published possession cum sale notice in the leading newspapers stating the terms and conditions of the public auction. In response to the said notice, the respondent number 3 submitted its bid for purchasing the said property. The said action was challenged by filing an application under section 17(1) read with section 19 of the Act before the Debt Recovery Tribunal. The application was presented on before the Delhi, and the concerned presiding officer declined to pass any order and sought appropriate directions from the Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal for transfer of the said application to some other DRT. As no order was passed by the TRAT, the matter was again placed before the DRT, and that day the DRT was informed that the bank had already taken over possession of the property in question and put the same into auction for sale. The borrower preferred a writ petition before the High Court and the High Court directed the borrower to deposit certain amount with the bank and further directed status quo as regards the property to be maintained. Eventually, the High Court wide order only directed the DRT